Hi there, welcome to this lesson on Azure Private Link, where we are going to have a look on how we can use the Azure Private Link services to integrate specific Microsoft services within our virtual network. To understand about Azure Private Link, or what exactly is Azure Private Link, it means that we are talking about providing a private connectivity from your resources in a virtual network to Microsoft service via a private link. So the key message here to remember is the private IP addressing. So other way of explanation for what exactly Azure Private Link is, it will enable you to give you an access for your Azure platform as a services, for example, either Azure storage or SQL database, and these are hosted at your customer owned or partner services over a private endpoint in your virtual network. And if you look at the network traffic between these virtual networks within this service negotiates over the Microsoft backbone network. So you are eliminating exposure of public internet or internet connectivity. So we can also create our own private link within the services to your virtual network and deliver it privately to your customers. Okay, so we do still get a familiar optimized backbone routing. That's what we discussed and that we have seen within the previous lecture for service endpoints. So when we use your private link here, not only we get the backbone part of between resources in your virtual network, and also we get the supported Microsoft service, but we get a private IP address that within the resources. That's a key as we talked beginning of this lecture. If you see here, there are two things that we have within this short PPT. Like we also have your private endpoint. So what exactly this private endpoint? So private endpoint is a network interface it's going to create automatically when we try to configure either private link or private endpoints. So it is a network interface that connects you to privately and securely to services powered by Azure Private Link. So this private endpoint is nothing but another way, it's a network interface, right? What we talked. So it will have an IP address. Definitely, it's going to be a private IP address from your VNet, and effectively bringing the service into your virtual network, because since it has the private IP address, and the service could be an Azure services, for example. It could be a storage account or maybe your Cosmos DB or SQL database. Such different services we can take as example. So we talked about the private endpoints, which is nothing but it will have an NIC card and it will also get the IP address. And when we talk about the IP address and the communication, there should be something called DNS, right? The FQDN, it's going to be a part of your connecting string. So it is very important to correctly configure your DNS settings to resolve to all your allocated private IP addresses. So existing Azure services might already have a DNS configuration within your network. Maybe let's say if it's your on-premises or maybe on your cloud, you might have already your own DNS configuration. So in that situation, you might have to reconfigure according to your configuration to resolve that private IP address or the private endpoint IP address to that specific Azure resources. Let's say there are different services as we talked. For example, if I take it as the database, so I need to give here as the I need to give as a private link dot database dot windows dot net or database specific information to be to be configured, and these are the list of specific zones that needs to be configured according to your scenarios. So again, the scenarios could be either you fall into without a custom DNS server, or maybe you may have your working with a DNS fast forwarders, maybe within your on-premises workloads. And also last one would be the you might have a configuration where you wanted to forward your virtual network and as well as the on-premises workloads using a DNS forwarder. So in that situation, you might have to send these specific resources information to be add it into your DNS server so that it will properly resolve with the private as well as the public request, because we are talking about the private, so all the requests should be diverted into private, and that private link or the FQDN should have an IP address for your network. So we need to configure that specific configuration, and please make sure that you check out the specific link which is associated within the lecture of this course, and you can check out here by visiting to docs.microsoft.com, and then you can go for the private links here. So this is the link which talks about that specific DNS configuration. Now let's go back to the slide and talk about the key benefits. So the key benefits are here: you can access privately the complete services within your Azure platform. So when you connect your virtual network to services Azure without a public IP address at a source or a destination, that means uh, it's really secure because your services are not exposed to the outside, and the service providers can render their services in their own virtual network, and consumers can access those services in their local network. And the private link platform will handle complete connectivity between the consumer and services over the Azure backbone network. And the second point is on-premises and the peer network. So accessing services running in your Azure on-premises over your express route. Let's say you have a configuration for the private peering or VPN tunnels or peer virtual networks using private endpoints. There's no need to set up any additional public peering or transfer or communication over the internet to reach the services, because we are going to configure just the DNS specific configuration for your on-premises network. So all we have to do is we have to simply resolve that specific service, and it would get connected with the help of backbone of Microsoft network. And third point would be the protection against data leakage. Definitely, since the private endpoint is mapped to an instance of your platform as a service, uh, a resource instead of the entire service. So you're not exposing everything, you are just exposing whatever the service is needed. And if they try to access any other services, that specific service will be automatically blocked. This is a mechanism provides the protection against any of the data leakage risks. And coming back to the other point, global reach. So connect privately your services running in other regions. The consumer's virtual network could be in a region A, and it can be connected to different services behind the private link in a region B. So that really helps, or it resolves your regional level virtual network problems. So you know need to even go for a peering or other concepts site to site and other things, so it works. And the last point of for the key benefits would be the you can extend your own services. So when you enable the same experience and functionality to render your services privately to your consumers within the Azure by placing your service behind a standard Azure load balancer, you can actually enable it for private link, and the consumer can then connect directly to your services using a private endpoint in their own virtual network. And you can manage the connections request using approval call flow. There's a method how you can approve it. And finally, Azure Private Link works for your consumers and services belongs to a different Azure Active Directory tenants also. It doesn't depend on specific to your own tenant. And last but not least, let's also have a look on the logs and monitoring point of view. When we look at the logging and monitoring, like any other services, for the monitoring purpose, you can also monitor with the Azure Monitor for your private endpoint locations for the data inflow and outflow. Similarly, private link also can be monitored with the in and out data processed, and also NAT port availability information. And you can actually archive the logs to your storage account, and you can stream to even Event Hub for further analysis. And as we talked here, Azure monitoring logging also very useful in terms of having a look on what's going on within the private link or private endpoint section. And now let's jump into the pricing. That's the last one. If you look at the pricing for Azure private link pricing for the endpoint and the inbound outbound, or for that specific data, it's going to charge 0.01 per hour basis for the endpoints, and $0.01 per GB for the inbound and outbound data process. That's how it's gonna apply the charges in terms of the data inflow and outflow. And for the endpoint, it's going to also charge per hour basis also. And there's no charges for the private link service that you create. Instead, it's actually based on the data flow. Let's try for the demo purpose. What we can do is we can actually search for the private link, and you would be getting a link here. And this is where you're going to actually configure. Once you configure the connectivity, specific information will be appearing here as the active connection.